born and brought up in Torry. My father was a fisherman, my husband was a fisherman. But there's been a lot of changes. Oh, yes. When I went to school, there was nothing like this here. That was all park, you know, grass. And if we thought we were late, we would have jumped the headmaster, the harbour master's dyke there and gone up.
"500 years ago, in 1495, the ancient fishing village of Torry was granted a royal charter by James IV to become a free borough of barony within the land at Nigg, owned by the Abbey of Arbroath. In those days, the village of Torry, nestling in the southern part of the great shallow lagoon that was Aberdeen's first harbour, was a small, close-knit fishing community of less than 100 people, each generation following the timeless trade of its ancestors in salmon, herring and inshore white fishing. But as we've heard, 500 years has seen one or two changes in Torry. From a small fishing village of a few dozen families, Torry now has a population of around 11,000 and is just one of the many districts that go to make up the city of Aberdeen. Or is it? Although Torry officially merged with Aberdeen in 1891, having previously been in the county of Kincardine, the River Dee being the natural boundary, Torry has doggedly insisted in retaining her own identity, still producing her own offspring, Torry loons and Torry quines. So what is Torry? Who are Torry's loons and Torry's quines? And precisely what is Torry celebrating in this, its 500th year? But if we want to get to know Torry better, we've got to go back much further than 500 years, to long before it ever became a free borough. To tell the story of Torry from the beginning, we've got to come here to the Bay of Nigg, just a wee bit south from the entrance to Aberdeen's harbour, around the Girdleness headland. It was here in the 7th century that Saint Fittick, a French saint of Scottish descent, was swept overboard from his ship in a fierce storm out at sea, but luckily was washed ashore here in the bay. St. Fittick had been sent by his bishop to preach the gospel to the Picts, and it was St. Fittick, Torry's patron saint, who first brought Christianity to this part of Scotland. Dragging himself onto the shore, St. Fittick drank from a well close to this spot in the bay. St. Fittick's well for centuries being thought to have healing powers. And every year on the 30th of August, St. Fittick's Day, the good folk of Aberdeen and from further afield would make their annual pilgrimage to drink from the well. But over the centuries, like so many other parts of Torry, St. Fittick's well has long since been reclaimed by the sea. St. Fittick built a church here overlooking the bay, where some 600 years later, in 1242, the Bishop of St. Andrews, David de Burnham, was to dedicate a new church here in the saint's honour, part of which was incorporated in the building of a still later church in the 17th century, which we now see as the ancient ruin of St. Fittick's. A walk through St. Fittick's tombstones gives some idea of the harsh role the sea has played in these parts over the centuries. In the corner of the graveyard is the remains of the watch house, built in the 1820s, where a vigil was kept to prevent the growing crime of body snatching for medical experiments. And we can still see in the ruined walls of the church the leper's window, from where these unfortunate outcasts were allowed to hear but not take part in the service. Torry is probably named after the Gaelic Tor, meaning a small hill, and in the 13th century the whole of this area was owned by a Celtic nobleman, Cormac of Nigg, from whom the area of Nigg gets its name. His fortress, a basic structure of earthwork and timber, was strategically placed high on the hill so as to overlook the mouth of the River Dee and the Bay of Nigg in case of attack. And the remains of Cormac's earthen stronghold can still be seen in the grounds of the Balnagask House sheltered housing complex. But by halfway through the 13th century, the lands of Nigg were back in the hands of the crown, with Alexander II granting Torry, along with Nigg, to the Abbey of Arbroath, which had in fact been founded by Alexander's father, William the Lion, in 1178. And so it was for the next 3 centuries that Torry folk would live and work in the Abbey of Arbroath's lands at Nigg, before being made a free borough. Today, many of Torry's earliest street names recall its historic past. In 1829, Nigg Church was opened to replace the ancient St Fittick's as Torry's parish kirk. Not only did the Heritors build the new church, they also provided for Torry's Wellington Suspension Bridge to be built, which first opened for foot traffic in November 1830. They also financed the making of a new turnpike road, still in use today, from Wellington Bridge to join the Stonehaven Road beyond the Loch of Lauriston. But Torry has always been synonymous with the sea and with fishing. As recently as the 1950s, a fleet of over 40 Great Line boats operated from Aberdeen, all berthed at Torry Dock. These boats could be at sea for anything up to 4 weeks at a time, fishing mainly for cod, ling and halibut, as far away as Greenland. The halibut these boats hunted could be anything up to 20, sometimes 30 stone in weight, requiring tremendous strength and skill to manhandle them on board. And Torry was also the home for many smaller line fishing yawls, fifies, scaffies and zulus, which would have made daily inshore trips. The lines on these boats could each have had as many as 1,000 hooks, with a yard between each hook. Usually there would have been 4 of a crew, with each man having his own line. That meant 4,000 hooks that had to be baited every day with fresh mussels. So the fishermen's wives collected, shelled and hooked the mussels every day, as well as carrying out their daily household chores. The wives also gutted the caught fish and carried the catch in a basket on their back to be sold in the market at Aberdeen. The work of a Torry fishwife was never done, and their life was hard. To guide boats around the northeast coast, this impressive beacon at the tip of Torry's Girdleness Peninsula was built in 1833. Its designer was Robert Stevenson, the grandfather of Robert Louis Stevenson. Next to the lighthouse was 10 acres of land for the cows belonging to the lighthouse keepers to graze on. And in 1901, 8 acres of this grazing land was purchased by Aberdeen Town Council to form the Walker Park, Torry's first and only public park. And to help boats navigate the channel leading to Aberdeen's harbour, the 2 leading lighthouses in Torry's Sinclair Road were built in 1842. The one a little further to the west being on a more elevated site, so that both lights could always be seen from a boat coming up the channel. Despite today's sophisticated navigation equipment, this 150-year-old method is still used today to safely guide ships into Aberdeen Harbour. And round the headland between Girdleness Lighthouse and the leading lights is the Torry Battery, built in 1860 to withstand an invasion from the French that thankfully never came. But by the end of the 19th century, it was doubted if the fort would be of much use in war, owing to the vast improvement of newer ships' armoury. Nevertheless, in both world wars, the strategic importance of Torry's Girdleness was recognised, with systems of dugouts and gun emplacements being made on the summit. After the Second World War, the fort was temporarily used to house homeless families, and during the Suez Crisis of 1956, the battery was once again manned. But after that, the guns were removed for the last time. The old fort is still often used as a lookout post today. Before the building of the Wellington Bridge, getting across the River Dee from Torry to Aberdeen had been a problem for hundreds of years. The only bridge across the river prior to the Wellington being the old Bridge of Dee. For hundreds of years then, Torry's only link with Aberdeen was by a ferry, pulled from one side of the river to the other along a wire rope fixed to each bank. And on the fateful Aberdeen spring holiday of April 5th, 1876, with many hundreds of Aberdonian holidaymakers enjoying the day down at the river, the ferry, overladen with 76 passengers, sank with the loss of 32 lives. Torry and Nigg Bay had long been popular destinations for Aberdeen young folk at holiday time, and of the 32 who lost their lives, the majority were teenagers and younger. The ferryboat disaster brought home sharply the need for more direct access to Torry, and 5 years after the tragedy, the Victoria Bridge was built in 1881 to open up Torry to Aberdeen for the first time. 2 years later, the first houses in New Torry were built, standing at the time in complete isolation. Today they are numbers 104 and 110 Victoria Road. And on the 2nd of May 1878, Torry Public School, now the oldest part of Victoria Road School, was opened. From the school records, we can see that the very first pupil to enrol was a William Wood, aged 10. Just 2.5 years later, at the age of 12.5, it shows he had left the school to go to sea. And an end-of-term report by the school's headmaster in 1888 also shows how Torry's children were expected to play their part in the fishing at an early age. 19th of June 1888. The school was closed tonight for the summer vacation, being a day earlier than the time appointed by the board. This I was obliged to do after consulting the clerk owing to the most wretched attendance. This afternoon only 205 were present, and tomorrow, being Friday and the herring fishing already commenced, it would have been much worse. I had a visit yesterday from the board officer, but there was no use attempting to do anything with the irregulars so near the vacation, and especially since the herring fishing has commenced. After the building of Torry's Victoria Road came Menzies Road and Walker Road, with Walker Road School opening in 1896. In the 10 years between 1881 and 1891, Torry had trebled its population from around 1,000 to nearly 3,000. And in 1891, the same year that Craiginsh's prison opened in Walker Road, Torry officially became part of Aberdeen. The building of Victoria Bridge had opened up Torry as a great southward extension of Aberdeen, and at about the same time a maritime revolution was about to transform Torry and the economy of the city of Aberdeen. In 1882, a few local businessmen formed a syndicate and bought a converted steam tugboat called the Trawler for the purpose of carrying out trawl fishing. After only 6 months, the venture was making a healthy profit. The trawler boom had arrived. Line fishers from scores of little havens around the northeast reacted to the shockwave of this new fishing method, and fisher families from these smaller ports, along with men from English towns such as Hull, Grimsby and Great Yarmouth, flooded into Aberdeen, and in particular to the new suburb of Torry. Aberdeen Fish Market was built in 1889, and the Albert Basin became the base for Aberdeen's new trawler fleet. By the beginning of the 1900s, Torry's population had increased in just under 10 years from 3,000 to nearly 9,500. And by 1914, Aberdeen had become the largest fishing port in Britain. Tradesmen and shopkeepers followed the new fishermen to Torry, and by the time Aberdeen Town Council began developing new housing schemes after 1920, both old and new Torry had taken on the character of a self-contained satellite town. With Torry's acknowledged expertise in fishing spreading throughout the world, scientific centres of excellence were established to develop the industry. In 1923, Torry's Marine Laboratory was opened to help monitor, manage and conserve fish and shellfish stock. And 6 years later, in 1929, the Torry Research Station was opened to work in the handling and preservation of fish as a food. Both these organisations have excelled over the years in carrying out applied research and development programmes within the fishing industry. Torry's continued growth led to more housing being developed on Torry Hill, with Torry's new Garden City begun in 1920. And on the brow of Torry Hill, in the centre of Garden City, Torry Academy was built in 1927 as Aberdeen's first purpose-built intermediate school. The streets in this new part of Torry are named after ranges of hills which could be seen from Torry Hill. The one exception to this being these streets, named after the Aberdeen whaler Oscar, which was wrecked near Girdleness in 1813, when out of a crew of 44, only 2 were saved. Torry's St Fittick's once again being the fitting last resting place for these brave men. But in more recent years, another boom has exploded even more loudly than that of the trawler. In September 1969, oil was first discovered in the North Sea. And little over 2 years later, in October 1971, Aberdeen Corporation voted 31 votes to 3 in favour of scrapping plans for the restoration of the fishing village of Old Torry, and instead decided to demolish this village within a city and lease the site to Shell UK Exploration and Production Limited to be used as an oil service yard. The councillors of the time thought they were taking this decision with the best interests of the city as a whole at heart. The discovery of oil was to play an immense part in not only Aberdeen's development, but the whole of the UK's. Nevertheless, yet another part of Torry's heritage was to vanish. But, just a street or two away, there still survives in Torry's Abbey Road a fisher square built in 1870. The square was designed by William Smith, the same architect who designed Balmoral Castle, and was the very last and in its day arguably the very finest of all 19th century housing schemes which had been specifically built for fishermen. Alec Adams was born in this house 73 years ago. It's been in his family for 5 generations, and Alec still lives in the house today.
It used to be my grandfather's house. My grandfather, when he had a large family, that he moved round to Abbey place round the corner. My uncle lived in 4 Close down in Old Torry. And also, next door to my father, Mr. Bond, he had 2 shops down at Ferry Road, the corner of Ferry Road. My mother married an Englishman from Yarmouth. He came from Potterheim, just outside Yarmouth, and he was on the herring boats. And my mother and there was 7 sisters, and they all went with the herring fleet. We either got in our mending nets and doing all the usual things with the herring. And they followed them around the coast up to the Shetlands and everywhere. And my grandfather, he was a trawl skipper, and he died at sea, my grandfather.
For hundreds of years the sea has played a central role in Torry's history. From the storm which swept St Fittick overboard in the 7th century, mercifully allowing him to come ashore at Nigg, to the many storms at sea which have not allowed Torry folk to come home. Through the booms of fishing and oil, Torry has helped us all to benefit from the sea, often at her own tragic cost. We all owe a lot to the village of Torry, and to all her loons and quines.